Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about character creation in Nevergrind Online. I've seen a lot of discussion in Discord, many questions asking about which class, which race, how many points should I put in my attributes, male, female, which mode. So I'm going to explain all of that in this video, and I'm going to go over, just give you a general idea of what to look for and just kind of address many players' concerns that I've heard in our Discord. So let's just go through it. As you can see, we have several major categories. We have race, avatar, class, attributes, and down here we have gender, game mode, and ladder. And I'll explain gender and game mode first. Gender is pretty straightforward. This is male. They just visually they're different. That's the main difference in this game. But also there is a minor difference in terms of their starting resistances. So I gave males ice and arcane resistance, and females have poison and blood resistance. Now, honestly, I wouldn't sweat the difference here. It's a pretty minor difference. We're talking about something like 5 points. So it's not going to make a big difference in the grand scheme of things, but perhaps you have a preference to avoid blood damage, or perhaps you have a preference to, go into an ice dungeon and fight there. Well, that may factor into your overall decision making. So, pretty minor, but that is something to think about. And I should explain these game modes as well. In general, these default to normal and ladder, and I think I would prefer the majority of the players in that mode, especially ladder. Eternal is kind of like, the difference between ladder and eternal is that eternal, it will always be there. It's not really a competitive mode. It's for people that aren't concerned about ladder, the leaderboard, and there are a few benefits to being on eternal. For example, you can use the /players command. And for those that have played Diablo 2, you may remember the /players command in that game. It's similar to that. So you could adjust the difficulty on the fly and be like /players5, and it would set the difficulty for 5, like as though you had a full party of people. And that may be fun to do. So that's something you can do in eternal mode. You can also do it in single player. But on ladder, we want to encourage grouping, so if you want higher difficulty, you have to group with other players. And just a little side note, yes, there is a magic find bonus for having a big party, so that's kind of a subtle bonus that most don't know about. Game mode, this is pretty straightforward, normal and hardcore. For anyone that's played action RPGs, this should be familiar. If you're not familiar, normal means when you die, you don't have to worry about it. You just basically start over. You respawn in the entry room, and you may waste a little time, but that's really about it. There's no gold or XP loss in this game. You just lose time. And whatever loot you may have gotten from that battle. And then, of course, hardcore mode is single death. So if you die in hardcore mode, that's it. You're finished. And in this game, your death is broadcast to the whole server. I think that's an interesting feature, just because it's kind of funny how chat always reacts to that. Now, let's dive into race, class, and attributes. I don't think we need to talk about avatar too much. That's just 40 different avatars per gender. So, hey, just pick whatever appeals to you. And let's look at dwarves. Alright. Let's talk about race. Okay, there's 12. Well, there used to be 12 different races. Now there are 14 after Anukari and Nekabus were added. So let's talk about these races. We'll go right down the list. And I'll say up front that races really are not... They're not dramatic differences. Visually different. They're visually different. And that's probably the biggest difference that you'll have to live with. But to be honest, the differences are quite small, especially at the end game. Now, you may notice a difference early on, more than you will later in the game, simply because the bonuses that you get are small, and those bonuses will be dwarfed by items that you get later in the game. So, now one thing I will say that isn't really obvious from the screen is that there are hit points. Each race has a hit point, mana point, and spirit point multiplier. And unfortunately, I don't have those values on hand, but you will notice that you have very different values for those three resources. So, for example, a rogue, an ogre warrior has way more health than a gnome warrior, for example. So, that's not really indicated really clearly on the screen. That's just something you have to discover along the way. But just bear in mind that there are these multipliers for every race for hit points, mana, and spirit. And you'll notice that as you'll level up. You'll be like, oh yeah, ogres have way more health. A race like, say, a Seraph has high mana and spirit multipliers. You know, a dwarf is going to have high spirit multipliers. So they're just going to have larger resource pools. It'll affect that. And in addition to those resource multiplier differences, there will also be the bonuses that are indicated here on the description. For example, the Anokari, they have additional blood resistance and gold fine and a defense bonus. And remember, these are pretty small differences, but that they do exist. Barbarian, they have a bonus to two-hand blunt, and they also have a bonus to ice spells. Dark Elf, these are pretty popular just because of the life leech early on, and that can help early on. And they also have a bonus to blood spell damage. Dwarves have a bonus to defense and alteration, so that will help with casting healing spells. Alteration is generally going to be a healing type of spell, but not always. It's just a school of magic. Gnomes, they have a lightning resistance bonus and some silence resistance that can be really beneficial as a caster. So that's not going to help you too much when you're a warrior or a rogue. But hey, maybe you want to pick something that's not exactly a meta, and that's okay. Sometimes it's funny to just play something like a gnome warrior, just because it's more challenging. But again, the differences aren't as big as some would make it out to be. There is a difference, but again, I don't think it's the most important thing. Yes, Ogre Warrior is probably going to have an easier path, but I don't know. Sometimes I think sometimes you just live with just being not the most optimized thing, in my opinion. Half-Elf, they have a bonus to all non-casting skills, which means like dodge, parry, riposte, skills like that. So it has nothing to do with alteration, evocation, or conjuration. So that they may be a little bit better with melee-oriented classes. Let's go into the next one, Halfling. They have a bonus to offense, dodge, and piercing weapons. Another thing I just popped in my head, you're going to notice that each race has a different base value. So it starts out with a base value, for example, 8, 16, 9, 9, 9, 21, 22. You can see all these values. And when it's green like this, that means that there's a class-related bonus. So if I click these, you see how there's a base value and then the class changes the total value. So the class is building on top of race. I thought I'd mention that. Sorry about the rabbit trail, but it just popped in my head. Let's continue. We'll go to the High Elf. Generally a more kind of like a wisdom base caster. They have pretty high wisdom. They regenerate, so they have slightly higher mana regeneration and a bonus to evocation, which tends to be like a direct damage type of spell in general. Humans, they are somewhat balanced. One of the benefits they have is they can play every class, which no other race can do. They have a high fear resistance, good spirit, higher spirit regeneration, and a bonus to slashing skills. So, you know, if you like using swords, maybe humans are for you. Let's go to the Nekabis, a very agile and dexterous race. Yes, the cat people, I know. They are naturally gifted at hand-to-hand, so they have a bonus with hand-to-hand. So maybe a Nekabis monk would be an interesting choice. Let's go back to the description. They have a bonus to dodging, and they also have a passive bonus to bleed damage. So that'll make every melee attack do a little bit more. Ogres, as well as orcs, these are two races that are just, and barbarians I would say as well, are just have really high multipliers for health. Let's go back to the ogre here. They have a passive stun resistance, and just so you know, there are 4 different status resists in this game. There's stun, fear, paralyze, and silence. Paralyze, just so you know, that makes it so that when you're paralyzed you can't dodge, parry, or riposte. So it basically lowers your defenses quite a bit, and they can hit you much more easily. They have a negative bonus against arcane magic, so watch out for that. And they have a bonus to conjuration, so that'll help them out if you're a shaman. Let's move on to orc. Bonus physical damage to humanoids, which is interesting because humanoids are actually a pretty common mob type. There's like 7 mob types, if I remember correctly. And they have a bonus to two-hand weapons. So that's cool. If you like wielding big two-hand swords. Seraph, these are kind of like a divine hybrid being of sorts. Gifted at spellcasting. They're very resistant to arcane magic. And they have a bonus to all of the casting skills like Alteration, Conjuration, and Evocation. So that's going to help them for all of these classes here because they're all casters. And the final race, which is Wood Elf. Wood Elves are... they have a bonus to Archery, so if you play a Ranger, that'd be a good choice. They have Ice and Fire resistance, Ice, Fire, and Lightning resistance. And a bonus to Fire, Ice, and Lightning spells. Now, we're not talking like 50% damage bonuses. We're talking small bonuses here, like plus... I don't know what the value is, but it's like a couple points of bonus damage, which is only going to matter early on. So it may make a difference in the early going, but not a huge difference. Let's go back to human, and what we're going to do is talk about Bard, Cleric, you know... I kind of want to highlight the differences here. So as you can see, humans are a really good class to compare all the different classes. They're the best race to compare all the classes with because their base stats are all 15, right? See how the blue numbers are all 15? Well, by looking at this, you can look at the green numbers and see, oh, that is the class bonus here for Crusader is 2 for Strength and 4 for Stamina, 2 for Dexterity, 2 for Wisdom. So if you really want to figure out how this works, you can go through the human classes and look at all the numbers. Okay, +2 here, 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 here. And so yeah, that's how that works. Now, as for assigning attributes, you know, the green numbers tend to be decent choices for that class. You know, if you're looking to be a meta player, maybe some people think stamina all the way if it's hardcore mode. Maybe they think, I've heard some people say pump dexterity as melee, or even as a caster, because it does, you know, if you highlight these, it kind of gives you an idea of what these help with. And, but I don't know, some people think if you're a caster, just pump int and wisdom. Some even think, you know, if you're a healer, pump charisma, because this does help with alteration spells. And maximum spirit, some, you know, charisma could help healing spells in this game quite a bit. Maybe it's a difference, you know, we're only talking 10 points here. And 10 points isn't a lot. I mean, at end game, you're getting items that might have plus 50 from one item. So, is it really worth sitting here and deliberating? I mean, probably not. I mean, when I played EverQuest, I had a ranger that I pumped agility points into, and you know, that wasn't optima. That was not an optima setting either, but it didn't matter. I still had fun. But honestly, I think stamina is a pretty safe bet because more hit points is nice. Melee, if you want a safe bet, maybe strength. Spellcasters, if you want something safe, go with one of the bottom three. If you're a damage dealer, maybe intelligence would make sense to you. If you're a healer, maybe wisdom or charisma. It's really up to you. I honestly don't think you're going to notice a huge difference, because you're going to need bigger numbers to really make a noticeable difference. As for the classes, man, I don't know. I mean, this is just a matter of reading the description. A bard is really a utility class. They really are a force multiplier, make everyone else better. They're not... To be honest, though, they have so many diverse talents that they could be a little bit of everything. They do have a reputation for being a high actions per minute kind of class. So if you don't want to be pressing the buttons all the time, maybe Bard's not for you. And they tend to juggle a lot of songs, and that could be a little taxing on your mind. Maybe if you find that annoying, maybe that's not for you. But if you like to be highly engaged, Bard may be a good choice. And you'll certainly always be welcome to groups, so that's a nice thing. Cleric, I would say they're one of the best, probably the best healer. You know, it's debatable, but they have, you know, every class has 3 talent trees, and they have one that is really focused on healing and survival. So, you know, that's an option, and then they have, you know, every class has 3 talent trees. So you're really not pigeonholed to being one type of thing in this game. It's not that type of game. Every class has options, and you can decide to be more like a battle cleric, or you could be a healer. And I think there's even options to be like a melee sort of, like a battle cleric. I think there may be some skills like that. I'd have to double check. But anyway, the point is that all of these classes you see aren't going to be exactly what this little detailed description has, just simply because the talents allow for so much flexibility into what your character actually plays like. So, yes, when people see cleric, they do think healer, but, you know, maybe you're a DPS cleric. I mean, you could, that is a possibility. Crusaders, I think, primarily they're thought of as a tank. They're a good tank. They're able to, you know, help, you know, they generate a lot of threat and keep mobs on them, and they have a lot of good survival skills. They have a few different trees, and it allows quite a bit. You know, there's always almost always a defensive tree, and then there's a few variations on how they how it modifies their skills and spellcasting. So yeah, they've been a pretty popular choice. They're a pretty solid tank overall. Druid, personally, I find this to be one of my favorites. They're like elementalists, and they also have healing and support spells. They have the ability to transform into a bear, which I always think is hilarious. They have a talent tree where they can transform and then do a lot of melee damage, so that's kind of an interesting spin on what a druid could be. They have a tree that is more of a support role, and then they have a tree where they're doing more like elemental damage. So there's a lot of variety with each class. And I won't get into too deep to explain all these trees and everything. I mean, I would have to do that in a separate video, like where I just talk about one class, because that's just too much to cover in one video. Enchanter, they're a really good utility class in general. They're thought of more as a support role, but they're great at helping doing a lot of stuns and freezes, and helping to control the battle and help mitigate damage. And they have good debuffs. So enchanters are great. If you ever played old school EverQuest, it's similar to something like that, but definitely a different spin on that. Monk's exactly what it sounds like. Your hand-to-hand. They have, well, I mean, they can use weapons as well, but they can also use hand-to-hand, which no other class can really do effectively. To be honest, the hand-to-hand skill is useful, but it does kind of get outclassed later on by weapons. I would say it's viable up to about Nightmare difficulty, and then you want to start looking for weapons simply because the stats are too hard to ignore. But they do have a good variety of talents to help them. You basically specialize in various types of monks. Plenty of fun options, so maybe that's for you. Ranger, they have, yeah, they're the only class that can really use bows effectively, so, and that's one of the talent options that they have. Or you can go more like a dual wield ranger type of class. They do have a couple support spells, a couple evocation spells, a couple nice buffs to help them out, and yeah, they're actually pretty nice because they can use a little bit of everything. I use them a lot when I'm testing, for example, because they can use every weapon, most armor except for plate, and they can use all passive skills, like, you know, they can riposte, they can dual wield, they can use alteration and conjuration. So they have a little bit of everything. They're the masters of none. Well, they're masters of the bow. I suppose that's about it. But aside from that, they're a nice class if you want to have access to all types of weapons and most armor. Rogue, they wear up to mail. Many have commented, hey, why aren't they leather like they were in World of Warcraft? Really, yeah, that seems to vary depending on what kind of RPG you're playing. But yeah, they do use mail. And they're mainly a DPS class. You know, of course, they have backstab, several stuns, and many other skills at their disposal that they can use. They even have a talent tree that helps them be sort of a tank, like some tankier skills that help them use like shadows and illusions to help them absorb hits. I'm not sure how popular that build is, but yeah, it is available if you're interested in doing something like that. Shadow Knight's always a popular option. Let's see. Whoops. Let's go back. Yeah, let's go back to Shadow Knight. Shadow Knights are always popular. Basically like the evil version of a Crusader. Of course, you have spells like Life Tap, and they can wear plate armor. Pretty flexible, and yeah, just 3 different skills. They got like Blood Knight, and various poison talents, all sorts of things that they can use to get the upper edge. And then Shaman, they're described as a healing class here, but again, like I said, just because they have heals doesn't mean that's the only thing you do. It's more like an action RPG where you have a little more flexibility. And one thing this game does that I haven't seen other games do is that the spirit, there's a mana and a spirit resource, and your healing spells come from spirit, but your damage spells come from mana. And what that does for you is that you can actually spend spirit, and it, you know, if you're out there casting, you know, glacial spikes or whatever, it doesn't take away from your healing potential because it's a different resource pool. And that's why we designed it that way. That way, classes like Druid and Shaman and Cleric, they can use damage spells, and it doesn't take away from their ability to heal. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But yeah, Shaman have a lot of different options. They have, you know, like ice, more like ice and poison oriented, and they have like cannibal, not, it's called devouring swarm, where they can sort of absorb health from their enemies. So that's, they're a pretty nice class. Templar are another damage dealing class. You could also think of them as a magical utility class. They offer some really nice buffs that are force multipliers. They can make other casters in your party do a lot more damage. And they actually have something most casting classes don't have, which is a healing spell. So then maybe they're somewhere in between, like a Crusader and a Wizard, something like that. So, yeah, their talents let them specialize in a variety of ways. So they have plenty of options. They're kind of the jack of all trades, master of none sort of class. So, you know, if you want to be a wizard, you know, if you want to be a wizard, then you're going to be doing, you know, pure damage, all about, you're going to be blowing stuff up. But if that's not really the role you want to do damage, but you don't want to, but you also want to help the party, then, you know, Templar might be a good choice for that. Warlock. This is kind of like a necromancer without pets. You could think of it that way. So, yeah, there are no pets in this game. Maybe that'll be in the future, but I doubt it. Maybe like a mercenary sort of thing. Anyhow, the Warlock, they're really good with damage over time spells. They have a lot of spells that do poison, blood. They're able to fear, which is great because it reduces the damage of all your targets. So they're pretty good at mitigating damage, and they have a lot of interesting options. They can they have a lich form sort of talent that allows them to, it completely changes how their auto attack works, and so that's an interesting choice that some players like as well. Kind of similar to how the druid can turn into a bear. They can turn into like a lich, and it actually changes their avatar and everything. Warrior, they're the third tank in this game. Once again, of course, that means they're good at getting threat and taking damage. They have a lot of talents that help them with that. And they also have the ability to opt for being a damage warrior, so that's an option as well. Wizards, yeah, like I said, they're a DPS class, so you're going to be blowing stuff up nonstop. If you want to blow things up, wizards are the way to go. But to be honest, talents are so flexible in this game. You could be a little bit of almost anything. I mean, your wizard's not going to be a tank, but, you know, I'm just saying that there's a spectrum of possibility with each class. It's not like a game like EverQuest where you have to be a very specific thing in a party. It's a little bit more like World of Warcraft, which allowed you to be more than just one thing. Like druids could tank. They could also be a healer. And I think they, you know, they could be a DPS class as well. So it just depends on what talents you go with. Another thing to keep in mind, I did mention those racial bonuses from Dark Elf. No, you know, from each race has their little bonuses underneath. Classes have those too. So for example, if you're a wizard, you're going to have a higher mana multiplier. So that's just something to keep in mind. Anyway, this video is already way too long. I don't know why I talked for this long, but sorry about that. That's just what happens when I start talking about this game. Check it out, and it's on Steam if you haven't checked it out before. Of course, Nevergrind Online. I'm going to make more videos when I have time, but you know, there's a lot going on right now, so I have a whole lot of time. I hope that answered a lot of questions for everyone. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to you. Alright, see you guys next video.